Hello, everybody. Your boys are back. My name is Eric. This young man is James, and you are watching the Ear Hustling Podcast, episode Jerry Stackhouse, number 42, if I'm not mistaken. Am I mistaken, James?
You are not mistaken, sir. That is Jerry Stackhouse.
Hey, you watch your mouth.
Hey, I'm a Stackhouse fan. I'm cool with Stackhouse.
Oh, okay, all right. Say, hey, don't have me come down there to Atlanta, man. I'll be down there in I don't know.
2 hours.
Right, 2 hours exactly. I'm gonna jump on the Concorde. How you doing, buddy?
Man, I'm doing great. How about yourself?
And I'm doing wonderful. I can't complain. There's no snow on the ground. Health is good. I'm not going to bring it up, but we're on number 46 now. We've passed 45.
Thank God. Thank God. I put a picture up on social media yesterday saying, I'm glad I passed this exit. It was exit 45.
Wow. You know, yeah. I saw one with the old Looney Tunes character thing. With the president, like that's all, folks.
Yep. Man, I cannot wait till we can actually stop calling them that too.
What's that?
President.
Well, we're not going to get into all of that, but you know,
we're not.
Somebody becomes the president, then you still have to address them as president,
unless they're officially removed. Then we would not have to address him as president. Am I wrong?
You're absolutely right. The saga continues, but we'll have plenty of time to talk about that.
We will.
We'll have time to review the pardon list, and there were some very well-known names that were on there. So that in itself is going to make a very intriguing episode. However,
I saw your name on there too. Congratulations.
Well, not a problem, sir. Not a problem. Hey, it's nice to be a free man. But I'll tell you what, we don't want to talk about something that's going to be divisive. We don't want to talk about something that's going to make, people mad. We want to talk about something that's going to be good for everybody. The one thing that we all have in common is finances. If you're having problems with your finances, you can improve your finances. If you have good finances, you can make your finances greater. But people don't want to talk money with Eric. People don't want to talk money with James. People want to talk money with Jen.
They do. Welcome, Jen.
Hey guys, how's it going?
It's good. Great. How are you?
I'm doing excellent, thank you.
So go ahead, Eric.
No, please. I've ran my mouth long enough.
I have to be honest, Jen. I love, even though it's with Eric, I love doing this podcast. I really do. But I'm extremely looking forward to this episode. This has been ever since you told us the topic. I've been looking forward to it. It's something that we all can relate to. Planning for the future today, basically. I was telling you off line that so many people, when someone passes away, for some reason it's an invitation for everyone to start fighting, over finances, over belongings, opposed to grieving. It's that business side of things. And I'm so happy that you're coming onto the show to talk about that today.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad you appreciate the topic because it is very, very important. And it's something that we don't address early enough. So it's so important to start having these conversations when it comes to money and when, not if, but when death does occur.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. It's something we're all going to experience. Like you said, It's not if, it's when.
Exactly. Like Ben Franklin said, the only thing guaranteed in this life is death and taxes.
Absolutely.
Unless you're Donald. Never mind. Anyway,
that's a different episode.
Yeah, my bad. I'm sorry. I had a lapse in judgment there.
And Jen, please feel free to drop in on any of those episodes that we're talking about 45. See, right now we're talking about 46.
Yes.
Well, actually, we're not even talking about 46 right now. We're talking about finances. We're talking about getting your stuff together. We're talking about something that a lot of us, to be honest with you, we've experienced that, our parents and our parents' parents, having to secretly gather money up together for someone's funeral. Something that you alluded to in past presentations that you've done. We just need to have conversations about that. And the right hand needs to know what the left hand is doing, because it's at the point now where we can't afford to play games with our finances, and we can't afford to mess this up. James, like he alluded to in his situations, I had to bury my mother, and it was be honest with you, it was a horrible experience. It interfered with the grieving time, to be frank. And you just don't know when it's going to happen. So it's better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the thing. It's that, again, with money, the thing that's so hard is that we go to school and we don't learn these life skills, which includes, taxes. What should I know about taxes? Not that you're trying to become a CPA, but what are some basics that you need to know about your taxes? What about things that have to do with, money? We're not taught about investing. We're not taught about estate planning. And again, this is not about you becoming a financial professional in those specific areas, but there are going to be some basics that you need to become aware of. And in this case, in today's episode, we're talking about basic estate planning. And that's going to entail a trust, living trust specifically, wills, even life insurance. And if you've listened to any of our past episodes, we talk about life insurance to, a full extent. How is it so important? Why is it so important? Because when you do run into these situations, it can be a financial disaster. And just like Eric said, when something happens, I got background music.
Yeah, intro.
My apologies.
It's okay. See, unexpected things can happen. And if you're not ready and you're not prepared, it can throw you off, right? And so, perfect example, what Eric went through, and he just said, it was difficult. It wasn't fun. It wasn't something that you want to go through when you're trying to go through the grieving process. Now you're stuck trying to figure out, how are we going to do this? How are we going to raise funds? Why do you want to be dealing with all that mess? Because you didn't have to if you had properly planned. And so where do we start? I think that's what we need to talk about first. Where do we start? The thing is that you have to, depending on where you are in terms of your age, I think if you are, if you're in your 40s, 50s, and your parents are still alive, you need to start having these conversations because, even I was speaking to some other friends of mine, like we're in that age where our parents are starting to pass away. And if those documents, their financial things are not properly planned, guess who's going to be handling it? You. And, Eric's gone through it. So many people that I know have gone through it. And what happens? So what happens is if there is an elderly parent and then they pass away and you never talked about the money, you don't even know what accounts there are. How are you even going to start navigating through this financial stuff that's been left behind? And then if you don't even know if there was a policy, a life insurance policy, how are you going to properly bury that person, your parent? And most of us are going to want to, given that there's different situations, but most of us are going to want to give a proper burial. We want to honor our parent. We want to, have a funeral and everything involved that we can. But everybody's in a different financial situation too. You may not afford it. You may be in a position where you can't afford it. So then this is what happens. And James was talking about arguments with family members. Because there's no plan in place, you start to argue. There's going to be disagreements. You can't ask the person who passed away, what did you want? What do you want? What kind of flowers? What kind of casket? Do you want to get cremated? And I'm going to say real quick, do not make the mistake of thinking like, well, just throw me in a box. I've had clients tell me that. Just throw me in a box. I'm like, seriously, that's just not going to happen. And even if you chose cremation, it's not like it's, $500 compared to, a casket. You're looking at a minimum of $8,000. And if you don't even have an emergency fund and you don't have any money stashed away, where are you going to come up with this money, even if you're just going to get cremated? So again, and that's just the basic plan. So you have to start thinking ahead of time. Is there a plan in place if this should happen? What is that person's wishes? What are those person's wishes? And so you got to start with like, hey, go to your loved one and just like, I know this. So I will say, I know it's a very touchy subject because some people in different cultures have a different outlook and perspective on talking about death. So depending on your situation and your relationship, it's going to take some easing into it. But this is something that has to be done. Because if not now, then when? This is the time to be able to say it. And maybe you don't talk about everything all at once, but just kind of plant the seeds and get a feel for what's in place. then you'll know where to start from, because you have to know what you're working with, because what ends up happening is you'll start arguing and how the funeral should be, who's going to pay for what. I have seen clients whose siblings get into fights because then they start arguing, well, you make more money. Well, you don't have kids. You should contribute more. You make more money. I don't have anything. I'm broke. I can't contribute. I mean, you can only imagine the fights around the money. And that's what ends up happening, instead of being able to come together as a family and grieve properly. Yes, there's going to be planning. So, you guys, have you seen any of this in dealing with other friends, or maybe something that you've seen personally?
Yes. And James, I'm going to let you answer as well. Yeah, absolutely have seen it. There was a point where with my adopted mother, before 2 or 3 days had even passed, there was already the bickering, and there was already the fighting about who's going to get this and who's going to get that, and who felt they was entitled to this and who felt that they was entitled to that. My dad didn't even have a chance to grieve because of all of the infighting, and he was already sick with cancer himself. So I saw firsthand, what that can do, how that can divide a family, honestly, even till this day.
Yeah.
And with my biological mother, I wind up having to bury her. I wind up having to take money out of my 401k in order to give her a proper burial, because the government gave less than $500 in order to bury her. And like you were saying, even to cremate somebody, to give them a proper headstone, to pay their final expenses, those things do not go away just because somebody passes away. So yeah, I've seen firsthand, and it definitely, as James alluded to, it can definitely cause a rift, in a family that will last for decades.
Yeah. And I think that's the sad part, because again, all of that could have been prevented. Imagine, I want you all to focus on that. If you're listening to this, I want you to focus on the possible aftermath if you don't take action. And, even as Eric said, I mean, look, now it affects Eric's future, financial future, because now that money was taken out of the 401k plan and now put to this. And we're not debating whether those are right or wrong thing. But the thing is, if there was a plan in place for any situation like this, the money could be already allocated for that and not having to be taken out of something that it was intended for a different purpose. Yeah. So it just changes the dynamics of so many things. And then even the worst part of it all is now the family dynamics, because now you know how it goes. Oh, so-and-so, is auntie so-and-so going to be there? Hey, is cuz going to be there? And now you don't want to go to the family party because you're trying to figure out who's going to be there. And now you can't even enjoy it. You got to look out for who's showing up. That's not a way to live life. That's not the way you want to have to go about your life and figuring I don't want to go because so-and-so's there. And it's not even just I don't need to go to a party. No, it's that you're carrying that burden. You're carrying that unforgiveness because of that bickering and that fight that took place years ago. And because some people harbor and hang on to that bitterness, that is so cancerous. That becomes internalized, and that pain carries on throughout the years. You can't live freely. And so it's not even just the money, it's the emotional baggage that continues with you over the years until you come again to another kumbaya and just forgive one another and bury the hatchet and forgive and love again. Some people can't even come to terms with that because they're so busy hanging on to that bitterness. So there's just so many things that could be avoided. I also want to share another reason why a living trust is so important. And I also want to mention, sometimes people say, look, just get a will. A will is not enough. A will is only going to it's still going to allow you to go into probate. And that means you're going to have to go to court, and every state's laws are different. So basically, you're going to have to go to court, pay probate court fees, the probate attorney fees. I mean, and depending on the size of the estate, there's going to be a percentage that's going to be taken out. And that, again, is money that could have gone to use the family heirs, the grandkids, whoever. And now it's being wasted on all these court fees and this attorney. And so what happens is, this is a phone call I got actually a week ago, and family member. And so what ended up happening was the father-in-law passed away, and there was no plan in place. There was a small burial policy, so that part was taken care of. However, the house is an issue. Of course, this is what happened. So there's no plan. So now the surviving heirs, the kids are saying like, and they're all adults, but it's like, oh, well, we're going to sell it. Now the other person saying like, no, we want to keep it and rent it. Well, the other person's like, well, let's sell it before, we have to pay taxes. And it's becoming this mess. And it's so sad because again, it's that situation where had this been talked about, had this plan been put in place, it could have been avoided. And so now there's all this bickering and this dissension that's happening between the family members. And he passed away, a couple weeks ago. And so I get this phone call, and then it gets complicated. It gets complicated when now there's like somebody else, one of the heirs are deceased. Well, what about this person? And does this person still get the share? And again, it's one of these things that you have to pay attention to. Anything can happen. And sometimes it might not even be a death. Sometimes it could be you become incapacitated. Let's say somebody gets into an accident and you get into a coma. This is a whole different situation now. The person didn't die, but now you have the situation where you have to make the decision. Do we resuscitate or do we pull the plug? Who makes that decision? You can't ask the person in a coma. And this is the problem. If you guys remember the Terri Schiavo case that happened decades ago, she went into a coma and her husband at that time was arguing with her parents. They were not in agreement of whether they should pull the plug, which is what he wanted to do, but they wanted to keep her alive. And that case went on for several years because there was no trust in place. And then it's like, who's paying for all this? Then there's that issue too. And it's so sad. Here's this woman in a coma, and then her husband and her parents are fighting because they can't come to an agreement, and she cannot answer for herself. And so, when I went through the living trust process, I had to answer questions. Do I want morphine? Do I want you to pull the plug? Do I want you to do this? And I just checked all the boxes, and it's like, no arguing. It's done. You know exactly what I want done if should any of this happen to me. So, it's really this thing about being able to leave with dignity. And it's also a gift to the people that you love so that they don't end up in this situation, because trust me, it's ugly. I've seen the mess. I've seen clients go through it. You heard a little bit what Eric and James have gone through themselves. So going back to what we were saying in the beginning, it's so important that you have this conversation. Again, I'm not saying throw everything on the table and start, drafting of documents and stuff like that. The first step you need to do is just like, hey, you know what? Have you ever thought about, should something happen, what do you have in place? It could be that simple. And you might get some resistance depending on the kind of person is like, why are you talking about this? You trying to kill me now? I mean, you get all kinds of weird answers, but plant that seed, because again, like I said in the beginning, if not now, then when it's too late.
Yeah. That's some great information, Jen. Just like with anything else, communication, and it's not an easy conversation to have. I can speak, directly to that as well. When my mom was sick, we knew what the outcome was going to be, but it was challenging even just to ask, what do you want? And because for that exact reason you said, you trying to kill me, so that's a challenging thing. So what do you recommend as far as I feel like the only way to do it is just to jump right in, and say, hey, eventually something's going to happen. How do you want to handle it? What advice would you give on that?
I would probably use an example of maybe somebody first, so it doesn't feel so personal. You know what I'm saying? Like if it were me, now granted, I'm in a situation where, I handled my parents' stuff, so they're set. So maybe I'm not a good example, but I'll think of somebody that went through this process, and let's say I want to talk to my parents or whoever I'm trying to have this conversation with, and I would just simply ask them, like, what, just the other day I ran into against so-and-so, and I saw them here, or they gave me a call, and this is what happened, and they just kind of get their feeling for it, because now it's not so direct. It's not so like, hey, if you die, what do we do? You know what I'm saying? It's like, let's ease into it. So kind of just bring up an isolated incident of somebody and that way you can kind of start to see, like, what are their thoughts, and like, oh, I never thought about that, or like, oh yeah, that's why you just never know, because again, we're not trained typically to ask these things. It's not common for most of us to have these conversations at the dinner table or at all. So when you bring up the scenario, you can at least start to get the feel of like where that person is by what they say or how they respond. You might even discover some things. They might say like, oh yeah, that's why I got this policy a long time ago. Or like, oh yeah, that's why your uncle so-and-so and I, we had an attorney and we drafted that thing 30 years ago. You just never know, because there are these questions that we don't ask. That happens all the time. I've seen it. I've heard it where I didn't know they took care of that. Or you find out could be the opposite. Okay, they've never done anything. But until you can have somewhat of a reaction and find out where their headspace is at, what they have in place, then you'll know what the next question is. Then you'll know how to proceed, because it's amazing when you just know how to ask the right questions and just plant that seed, bring it up. Again, use an example or maybe somebody just so you can see where they're at and how they react to it. And then you can start asking the next thing. Again, not all at once, because, if somebody's open and you can see how their body language is, and maybe you say, okay, this seems safe, I can proceed with some other questions. If you feel and you can see that they're pretty apprehensive, then you kind of have to proceed with caution and very slowly with kid gloves.
Right. Okay. All right. We actually have a question.
Yeah.
What if you're single, no kids, and don't have a relationship with family? What should I have in place? Great question.
Yeah, that is a good question. This is interesting. So I actually had a client who's in the same situation. She's single, no kids, and she has a boyfriend, but it's not like they're married yet. I did bring up the issue about kids. If you are planning to have kids, even a simple policy, because here's the thing, and I'm talking about life insurance, because you run that risk if you wait and wait. Two things happen: your premiums go up because you're getting older, and then the other thing is you might develop some kind of illness or some chronic disease, or you might find out, especially if you have some family history of cancer, diabetes. You got to be very careful that sometimes people apply and then they find out through the medical exam, they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I had this. So be aware that could happen if you wait that long, so ask yourself, do I plan on having kids? Because eventually you might have dependents. And if you wait too long, you will run into the situation with higher premiums because of your age and the age at which you are applying, or you can run into the situation where something might come up, or you might be healthy, but either way, the premiums will be higher, 5-10 years from now than if you apply now for life insurance. And then, if you have a mortgage, you still should look into like, who's going to take care of that? Especially if you have, a house, that's something, you're single, you don't have kids, but what happens is when you pass away, there still has to be your estate that needs to be handled and settled. So especially if you, and I don't remember if it was in the question, but if you have property, that still has to be settled. Who's going to take over that payment? Is the, okay, so you didn't bring family. Yeah. So if you happen to have a house, but you don't have kids, you're single, that still needs to be discussed. Who's going to take over the mortgage payments? Is your property going to be sold? So, at that point, you may not have to have a trust at that point. However, what happens if you go into a coma? Those are some things that you might want to ask yourself. It's one of those things that when are you going to do it? And so just my suggestion in general would be like, call an estate planning attorney, have a consultation, and don't just go with the first one. Get your questions in line and just kind of see what the opinions are, again, because every state's different. So depending on where you're at, the rules could be different. So just get used to asking certain questions and start to get familiar with things, because let's say, for example, I get into a coma and I have no dependents or anything, or I become incapacitated for some reason. Who's going to continue paying my bills? Who's going to be the power of attorney? Who's going to have be in charge of like my medical directive and all these decisions? I may not have kids, I may not be married, and all these things, but there's some certain parts of my life that must still continue because I'm not dead. I'm in a coma. So there's those types of situations that you still have to consider.
I've got a question. What happens to my estate if I don't plan anything and I pass away?
Ooh, yeah. That, I've seen some different answers on this one. I can't remember. It was something, because guys, I'm not an estate planning attorney. So just so you know, it's something I just run into. So I'm trying to provide the general advice that I know about it. But it still has to be settled. I can't remember if I don't know if it goes through probate. That I'm not too sure if it's, a situation where it's almost like, does it just kind of, dissipate and the court makes a decision, or do your family members have the ability to step in and fight in for what they want? So that one I would have to find out. Yeah.
Okay. And just one last follow-up on that. Have you ever seen a situation where the state just winds up having the estate?
No, me personally, no. I do know that if in, let's say, for example, let's say there's two parents that are both alive, but they have small children. There are some cases, though, where a guardian, there's no trust, so the guardians have not been assigned. The state will decide. Okay. So there's things like that where, again, it all comes down to this. It's so much better if we make the decisions for ourselves. That's the bottom line. You want to be able to make the decisions, because if it's not made by you or the surviving family, that's when the states makes that. That's why you go into probate. That's why you go into court, and then everybody argues, well, I was supposed, they said I can get the car. Well, they said that I was going to get this. It's not in writing. I shouldn't say, it's not in a legal binding document where the court is just going to follow those wishes. If it's just kind of it was written on a piece of paper, or it was just hearsay, it's just not going to hold water in court. And again, this is to make sure that the wishes are carried out by the person who has passed away, so that nobody's arguing. It's like, you can't argue this. This is already set in this trust. There's nothing to argue, because then it becomes like, well, they said, no, they didn't. It's like that he should see, she said type of thing. And it's an ugly mess. So just plan properly. Understand that if you state your wishes, you can avoid so much of this mess, but it has to also be in this legal, binding document, like a living trust.
Okay. So I have a few questions, Jan. First one being, so a video would not be enough?
No.
Really?
No, it has to be a trust. Yeah.
Okay. The other question is, here we have another question here before I continue on. What is the minimum life insurance policy you recommend?
Yeah, so if you want to just cover burial, usually that's like a 20,000, anywhere from 10,000 to 50,000 for a burial policy. Because again, when we were talking about Eric's situation, cremation even just starts at 8,000. And then if sometimes if you want a certain casket, I've been to a ton of funerals. And I remember there was a project, ironically, in high school. I took this class called Death and Dying. I went to a private Catholic school. And there was a class I took called Death and Dying. And I had to go to a mortuary and plan my funeral. And I know it sounds morbid, but I'm telling you, it was so eye-opening. It was such an interesting thing, because that's part of life. We tend to look at it like, I don't want to think about it, but it's actually part of life. And I remember going there and getting the pamphlet and everything. I'm telling, down to the gloves that the pallbearers are wearing is a cost line item. You want fancy flowers? That's more money. You want a fancy headstone? That's more money. You want the casket that's got it's lined with everything so that nothing gets inside it? That's more money. And the thing is, you want all these bells and whistles, it costs money. So, you have to look at it like that, or you just want something simple. But to go back to the question, I share that because everything has a cost to it. Even the people that think, I could just throw me in a box, I don't want anything fancy. Okay, but it still costs money. Even the pamphlets, even the brochures everything, the prayer cards, it all costs money. Even the prayer service outside of the burial and everything has a price and cost to it. So the minimum, if it's going to be just to cover policy burial, it's going to be between 10 to 50,000. But if you're looking for, life insurance, the minimums are usually 100,000. And if you're young, I'm talking like 30s, 40s. I mean, it's so minimal. It could be even like $20 a month. I'm telling you, I've quoted stuff, and you're a healthy individual, 30s, 40s, age range, even 50s. If you're getting something as low as 100,000, I'm telling you, some of y'all's cell phone bills a month cost more than what a life insurance policy would cost.
Wow.
So I want to get into life insurance a little bit. Of course, a lot of people ask, what's the difference between term and whole life? So if you could take a few minutes to kind of explain the difference, please.
Yeah, excellent question. So term and whole life, they're both types of insurance. And so the way that you want to look at it and break it down is term is going to be purely term, like auto insurance. So auto insurance, you get into an accident, the auto insurance company pays, right? All that stuff. Same thing with term insurance. The person dies, they pay the death benefit. So in this case, let's say it's 100,000, you die, they just pay 100,000, done. The term word comes from the amount of years that you're covered. So it means that you'll have that policy for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. That's pretty much what they usually go up to. So term is the amount of years that you would have that coverage, and it's just pure insurance. Okay, you die, it's only if you die, that's when it pays out, and then that's it. There's nothing else involved. When you hear whole life, the other category is that there is a savings component. So that's when you might hear the word cash value. So it's really these two categories. You have term, and then you have a cash value policy. So term we talked about. The cash value side is where there's a savings component. And under this heading, we have whole life, universal life, index universal life, variable life. You might have heard all those different terms. I shouldn't say term because term is this side, but all those different descriptors, they belong under the cash value side. And so basically they all have a different function. There's still an insurance policy. There's still a death benefit. So it could be 100,000. The difference is that cash value component, meaning that cash value means there's a savings inside this policy. So what happens is there's a death benefit of 100,000. So you die, the beneficiaries will get the 100,000, but there could be some savings in that cash value. And so that could be also that, depending on the type of policy, we're not going into that, but there's going to be an amount in that, it could be an amount in that cash value that the person can also get. Now, so I'm not going to get into, because that part can get complicated, and we can do another episode on that, but that's what I want you to understand. Term is just purely insurance. Anything under the cash value category will have the death benefit, but also there could be a savings component within that policy.
So not to complicate anything any further, but let's talk about term for a second. The thing that I never understood is, hypothetically speaking, you're 50 years old and you buy a term policy, and let's say it's 30 years.
Okay.
So that means when you reach 80, if you did not die before 80, then you basically lose that policy, correct? Correct. Yeah. So what would be the advantage, unless you're betting on yourself to die within the next 30 years? And not to be too blunt, but I guess I am.
It's okay. We're talking about death and dying this tonight.
Right?
No, not you.
What is the advantage of getting a term, unless you're already ill and probably obviously paying a higher premium? What's the advantage of doing that, something like that?
This is an excellent question. This could be a whole episode on its own. The advantage of term, because remember, let's go back to when I was explaining it, you had the term on this side, and then you had the cash value type policies on this side. This side tends to have a much higher premium. So let's say, for example, it could be $50 here. It could be $110 over here for the same death benefit, because a portion of that premium goes into that savings component and the cash value. And there's some people that will argue, depending on what financial guru you follow, they swear against whole life, they swear against cash value. That's a whole different episode, because there's a lot of things I can argue about that. But to go back to the question, what is the advantage? What's the point? The point is that sometimes that's all some people can afford. Sometimes it's just at least you have coverage. At least it's something you can afford, because it can be very dirt cheap. Like I said, $100,000 and somebody's only 30 something. It could be $14 a month. Like it's that cheap. That's what I was saying. Like, some people's cell phone bills are much more expensive than some of these term policies that they could buy. And so that's the advantage, is that it's dirt cheap insurance. You got coverage. The downside of it, that if you outlive it. So there is another theory, or maybe I should say philosophy, called buy term and invest the difference. You might have heard of that one. And the theory is that, or the philosophy to that whole thing is, if you get this really cheap policy, the term policy, that the money that you would have saved from not purchasing a cash value policy, you're going to invest it. So maybe you invest it into a Roth IRA, or you invest it into something, right? So this is the idea. So you're investing this difference and it's growing, but I'm telling you, from what I've seen over the years, because I used to adhere to that, subscribe to that, many people don't stick to the policy. I mean, they don't stick to the plan. They stop contributing to the investment, or something happens and they pull the money out, and it's disrupting the growth. And so why that philosophy has been touted is that if you're buying this cheap policy, eventually you become self-insured. Now that's assuming you followed everything and you consistently invested. You never pulled the money out. You never, you did stop investing. And so if this money grows to a certain amount of time, by the time you're 80 in this particular situation, by the time you're 80, you're supposed to be considered self-insured. The challenge is most people are not really going to be putting enough to grow to the level of becoming self-insured. So by the time they're 80, they're not going to really have enough. So that's where I believe that philosophy is flawed. Because over the years as an advisor, I remember there were so many people that said, I can't contribute anymore. Can you stop the contributions? When you stop your contributions, you're stopping the growth of that investment.
Right.
You're also stopping the plan from working later on in the future. And the likelihood, if there's no other planning in place, the likelihood of you jumping back in, it's slim to none. I don't really see too many people, especially when people go through a financial devastation. Heck, it could even be like, hey, I had to pay for this funeral. Hey, I had to go through probate. Those kinds of situations, when we don't plan for them, create a huge financial setback. So if you're dealing with that financial setback, you didn't tell me you're going to call me up and you want to go back and start investing. No, you're trying to recover from that financial setback that you planned for. Do you see how this is happening? So that's why it's people need to take that into consideration, because and sometimes it turns out to be, sometimes people just buy term and don't do anything else. So then they end up in that situation where they're now 8 years old. They have this policy that's going to expire and end in like 2 years, and then there's not enough for retirement and they can't retire. So, there's a lot of things to consider when you're choosing, and that's kind of like the picture that I'm painting if somebody were to take that route and only do that term and not the other stuff.
Okay. I have one other question about insurance, and we have a question in queue as well that I'll follow up with. Something I kind of struggled with, I still do it. I struggle with having life insurance through an employer opposed to having insurance on my own, because once you leave that employer, that insurance goes away. So it's almost like it's been a waste of money. What advice do you have on that, or what input would you have on someone who thinks crazy like me?
First off, you're not crazy.
Thank you.
It's crazy in a good way. We're all crazy in a little bit way. So
told you, Eric.
I'm right there with you guys. So when it comes to the insurance that you get from your employer, it depends on the kind of benefits that they're offering. But typically, when you're getting it through the employer, it's again, I know you all don't want to read that giant book that HR gives you when you get hired, because we all don't read it. However, you do want to know, is it 1 time, 2 times, 3 times your salary? That's typically what you're gonna get. So let's just say, it's $50,000 I make a year, and I work at this company, and they're gonna give me 2 times my salary. So you might off the cuff think like, hey, that's great. My family's gonna get $100,000 if I die. Okay, but you make $50,000 a year. How long is that gonna last? That's only gonna last 2 years, because they're giving you $100,000 and you still have to subtract the funeral costs and other things. And I think that's one of the biggest things that people miss, is that you think of a giant number, 100,000, but you don't you forget that your salary was $50,000. You're getting 100. That's 2 years. What's your family going to do? And that's the whole point of insurance. It's to indemnify, meaning to make whole again, that it's going to replace the income that's no longer coming in. And this is why you see people do GoFundMe, bake sales, car washes, because that money is no longer coming in. And then you see these descriptions of like, there was a wife and there's small kids, help them pay for groceries. And I'm not trying to knock anybody down, but I want you to see the urgency that you have to look at this stuff from a different perspective, because all those things I just mentioned, those fundraising types of things, are not a financial plan. And so going back to, do I get it at work? Yeah, take the thing that they're giving you if it's free, you know, if it's part of the benefit. But it's still important that you get your own, that you own it, that it's a separate policy that you got on your own. And it's not, and if you're going to get a term one, you typically want to get one that's 10 to 12 times your annual salary, not something that's going to last for 2 years. And the other thing too is, once you quit, that insurance policy is not portable, meaning it doesn't go with you. You only get that benefit while you're employed. So that's something you also need to consider, because let's say, for example, you're only, forget the whole thing, it's only 2 years that you're gonna, 2 years of salary that you're gonna, you know, get 100,000 if you're making 50. You have to also remember, let's say you stay at this job and you're like, well, I don't need to get my own, you know, I got the one through work, it's fine, it's good enough. But now let's say you've been there for 5 years and now you've developed diabetes, or you found out that you have some kind of stomach cancer. Anything could happen, right? We don't know. Health is crazy. Look how many people, and as we get older, we develop certain diseases or whatnot. Anything can happen. The point I'm trying to make is, you no longer work there. Now you're going to have to try to get your own policy. And even if you were to go to another job and they offer you a dissimilar benefit, like 1 to 2 times your salary, it's still not going to be enough. And now that you have this health condition, you're older and now you'll be rated. And rated means that your premiums are now going to be more expensive than had you been healthy. Does that make sense? So you have to consider all these things. It's not just like, oh, I'm getting X amount from my work. You can't take it with you. And then if you try to apply for your own later on, you're going to be rated and you're older. So your premiums are going to be way more expensive than had you applied for it when you were younger and healthy.
Awesome. So Jen, the question we have in queue is 80 the maximum age for purchasing insurance? It's
typically about 65. And the reason why is because by 80, they just kind of know, and I'm not trying to be like jacked up or anything. It's like, they know you're going to die. And so in the insurance companies, they have actuaries that do all the number crunching, and they know the numbers of like, this is the typical average age when people are going to die. It's just at that point, you're just like uninsurable. You just can't apply. So it's about 65. And I went through this recently with another client's parents, and it was like a double whammy. They both had diabetes, and it was already under control, but they had diabetes and they were already 65, and they couldn't even apply for, like one of them could apply, the other one was already over age, but it was like 66 or something like that. So it's already a sticky situation. You know, it's already kind of too late. Plus, it's not even that. By the time you're in I'm telling you, I'll show you. The example was 100,000 for each of them. They were 65, and the one that I could have written up was 65. The premium was $200 a month.
Wow.
So, you know, again, that's what I'm saying. You went from $14 when you were 40 for 100,000 all the way waiting till you're 65, and now that's like $200 a month.
Wow.
You know, and if you're already tight on the budget, are you gonna have allowance for $200 a month in the budget? So again, consider these things. It's not something you want to take lightly. It's not something you want to do when it's too late, because you do run the risk of you not being insurable.
Jen, that's great information. And here's a comment that a lot of people really have. Everything you're saying is right on, but it's hard to pay for something that would not be used, kind of like car insurance. If I get married, then I will.
Great point. And this is something that we definitely need a different episode on. So if it's the car insurance type, the term, some people will look at it like, I'm just wasting it. Right. And I get that. So there is an option where they call it return of premium. It costs a little bit more, but it means it's like you're going to get that premium refunded. if you don't die. Okay, but it costs more. So there's that option. On this side, when we talked about cash value policies, there is a way to use those vehicles as future income, so it's not a waste. So just know that there is a way for on this side that you can look at these products as something like, especially if you're risk averse, especially if you don't like the market and all those types of things. That's something that I've done with some clients where they're not using, yes, they want the insurance, but they also don't want to feel like it got wasted. But there's also ways to create income in the future that can come from the policy. So to answer your question, there is a way so you don't feel like I just threw it and it's, yeah, because even over here on this side, you can create a strategy where you can produce income for yourself in the future.
Okay. And Soleil comes back with another question. Doesn't life insurance policies require you to name a beneficiary? Who can I name besides kids or family? Now, I think I've heard before, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, hasn't people named like nonprofits where they can just donate the money to? Is that an option?
Yeah. So yes, you should name a beneficiary. Yes. And then if it's not friends or family, or I'm not friends or family, I'm sorry, family or kids, it could be anybody. And just like James said, it can be a nonprofit. People donate to foundations. So yeah, it's, and again, that kind of also goes with the estate planning. If you have a trust, you can name the trust the beneficiary. You can name it whoever you want. It doesn't have to be, you just better make sure the beneficiary is updated. That's a mistake that I've seen some people do, especially in situations where the person gets remarried and then there's new kids and then there's kids from a previous marriage. People don't update the beneficiaries, and that can become a problem because if that person dies, and then the new wife sees that the policy was still naming the previous wife the beneficiary, you can see that could become a mess. So if whoever you name as the beneficiary is whoever it is, make sure they know and make sure that it's always constantly updated if you ever need to change it.
And if you don't have anyone, Ear Hustling Podcast will
they will take it gladly.
Yes. And as a matter of fact, look what Soleil says. All right, James, you get all my money. Thank you, Soleil. I'm gonna miss you definitely.
Hey, HBO help a brother out. I can use some too.
You just brought something up, Jen, that I want to address as well. So what happens? Let's use the three of us for example.
Okay.
Let's say I have you and Eric listed as my beneficiary, and 50-50 split. And one of you, I won't speak badly on one, so I'll just anyone. One of you pass away and I never changed the beneficiary. What happens to now I pass away? Where does that money go? One person is still alive. Do they get the full 100% automatically? Or what happens in that situation?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I would like to think that Eric gets all of it. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to think of you leaving first.
Oh, you're so sweet. I talk about this stuff all the time, so I'm not afraid to use myself as an example. I'm not superstitious.
I mean, we are going to die, so it's just a matter of when.
Yeah, but that's a great question. I'm actually not sure. I haven't had, and this is going to sound weird, but I haven't had too many people die on me, but it's never been a situation where one of the beneficiaries has passed away. But again, that's actually something, again, you definitely would want to update if so it's always, a lot of times I find it's a case by case. Every situation is always so unique. And there's times when I'm at the call, I never dealt with this before. What do you do? Yeah. There's always the 800 customer service number.
Right.
I've got a question. It's in regards to married couples. Are married couples allowed to apply for an insurance policy jointly, or do they have to do it separately?
It's separate. Yeah. There's never a joint life insurance policy because you always have to, there are some smaller policies. There are some companies that will insure without medical. It costs a little bit more because you're bypassing that medical exam, but it's always separate because you have to do a medical. And so that's just how it is. It's never a joint thing.
And just one last, I almost think that when you're getting married, you almost want to say I do and then get an insurance policy. It is, and I hate to even sound that way.
Yeah.
Or is it would it be better for a couple to do it at the beginning of the marriage? Maybe that's something you talk about during the engagement period.
Should have it before you get married.
Yeah, I would say as soon as possible. I mean, if you already know, especially if there's kids, I mean, regardless if you're married or not, you should have, there should be some kind of plan in place, because it's, again, like I said, if there's also kids, that first and foremost too, because there's dependence. It's always, if there's dependents that rely on your income, you definitely need to have coverage. So it's not really a matter of when, because of the wedding. It's more of like, is the need there? Do you foresee that the person that you're going to be with is going to most likely rely on your income? Yes. And even let's say they don't. I mean, then again, do you have kids? Are there other dependents? Some people take care of their elderly parents. If there's anybody involved in that person's life that is dependent upon them, they should have coverage.
Okay.
Great questions, guys. I love it. It's like,
well, I'm not sure if we covered everything. I'm sure we have not, because I know I still have lots of questions about insurance, and like you said, that's definitely another episode.
mm-hmm.
As you all know, we talk money with Jen every third Thursday of the month. Next month is going to be a special episode. Jen will be here in the third week, but we're going to talk about something else. Jen, what else do you have, I guess, in closing about this topic or anything else?
Yeah, like I said, in the beginning, I think if you haven't had that conversation with your loved ones, do it. And we talked about how to approach that very gently. If it's something that it might be difficult, approach it very softly and tread lightly, because I know sometimes it's a very sensitive issue. Some people are not going to receive the question well, but you have to at some point. Otherwise, you've seen some of the examples that we've talked about this evening of what it could look like if you don't do that. And if you do have something in place, take the time to do a quick update and just check. Maybe you don't have to update it, but just do a check and see, okay, do I have the same beneficiaries? Are the Social Security numbers there? Sometimes people forget that stuff. It just makes things easier, because those kind of I'm telling you, when I've seen the death happen and then that the paperwork comes in after you send in the death certificate, it's like all this other stuff. If you don't have that handy, it's time to get organized. It's time to be organized with having those documents in a safe place, knowing where it is, who are you going to call that you need to, do you have the customer service numbers, have that in place, because I'm telling you, when things happen, that's not the time to be arguing. That's not the time to be looking for these important documents. This is something that you definitely need to be organized with, so that the process is not the person who died. It's you or whoever is the surviving family member that's got to deal with this. Don't make your life difficult by being unprepared.
Great words, Jen. Definitely appreciate it. Eric, looked like you were going to say something.
No, I didn't want to interrupt unless you were finished. I did have a question for both of you guys.
I'm done. What's your question?
What about you, James?
I was just going to lead us into the final segment of the show, but what you got?
Hey, you two guys football fans?
I am now.
Oh, okay. Well, we really don't care about James' opinion, but yeah, I guess we kind of have to get his opinion. Well, we have this little segment. I haven't named it yet, but I think I'm going to call it the ear hustling hustle pick.
Oh, that's a good name for it.
So we have the NFL playoffs are here. We have 4 teams that are remaining. We have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Buffalo Bills, the Green Bay Packers, and the Kansas City Chiefs. The winner of these 2 fantastic games will go on in a couple of weeks to play in the Super Bowl. So I was just wondering if I could get your pick, Jen, and your pick, James. We'll go with ladies first. So again, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are playing the Green Bay Packers in Green Bay, Wisconsin. So it's going to be pretty cold up there.
Yes.
Tom Brady, the old man of the league, versus Aaron Rodgers, who is a bad man. So between those 2 teams, who do you think is going to come out of this matchup to win?
I'm picking Aaron Rodgers with Green Bay.
Ooh. You see how she said that with confidence and swag?
She did.
I'm very confident.
Okay, well, very good. And there is another matchup. It's Kansas City versus Buffalo. So you'll pick one, or if you don't care, just say you don't care. Because I personally don't care.
I don't care.
Okay. All right. So we've got Green Bay winning next week, according to Jen. What about you, Mr. Montgomery?
Well, I've been struggling in my picks this year for some reason, but I'm still gonna pick. I think Tom Brady's gonna take care of business. You know, it doesn't matter that it's cold. He's played in New England his whole career, so he's used to the cold. I think Antonio Brown played in the cold. Gronkowski played in the cold. His core players are used to it, so I think he'll be all right. So I'm picking Tampa Bay in the NFC, and in the AFC, I really, 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 really want Kansas City to win, but I also want to see Buffalo to win. And you and I talked about this. I want to see Buffalo win just so Buffalo can play Tampa Bay in the Super Bowl and Tom Brady can stick it to Buffalo again. So that's my pick. I'm picking Buffalo and Tampa Bay this week.
Wow. Now, you know, Tom Brady is my favorite, like, sports icon of like all time in any sport. Him and Kobe Bryant, God rest his soul. So I picked Green Bay as my initial pick to win the Super Bowl. And, you know, on our famous wheel over here, I have successfully picked a winner each consecutive week. So
is the wheel coming back, sir?
The wheel is coming back. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I wanted Green Bay to win, but since my man Tom Brady is so close, and if Tampa Bay wins, they will have home field advantage at the Super Bowl. So I'm going Tampa Bay. But we're going to see what the wheel says.
What does the wheel say? And just to clarify, when you say Tampa Bay is going to have home field advantage, just so people know what you're talking about, the Super Bowl is in Tampa Bay this year. So that's what he's talking about, having home field advantage. So let's see what the wheel got to say.
Yep, and unlike the regular seasons, the Super Bowl is planned like years in advance. So it's really supposed to be a neutral site. There hasn't been a situation where, let's just say you stay in LA, where a Los Angeles team has actually played in the championship game at their home stadium. So that'll be a first. All right, here we go.
Don't say Buffalo.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
You did let's tell the people about this. You did a practice spin before we went live, and it said Green Bay then too. So looks like Green Bay might get it.
Well, you know what? It is Green Bay, and we are talking green with Jen.
That's right.
We are.
So you know what? I think that there's a theme. The wheel hell was even green.
Yeah, that's true. And Soleil is right. She predicted Green Bay versus Buffalo weeks ago, and she hasn't been wrong yet. And she did pick Buffalo is going to win the Super Bowl. I remember that specifically.
You know what, Soleil? Love you to death. But, man, I don't want to see Buffalo win the Super Bowl for so many selfish reasons.
So many selfish reasons. We won't talk about any of them.
We'll talk about them off camera.
We will.
Yeah, after the live broadcast ends.
Yes.
Absolutely. So, Jen, if Green Bay winds up going to the Super Bowl, we're going to have to fly out to California.
Yay!
And we're going to have to host the Super Bowl party.
That's right. 70-degree weather, sunshine.
Okay, we'll be booking our flights.
All right. Well, that's the show for tonight. Jen, thank you so much for being here and enlightening us once again. A lot of really good information. I look forward to part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5. It's could probably keep going for a long time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me again. It's always my pleasure to be here and spending every third Thursday with you guys.
Yes.
We appreciate it every third Thursday. And then please drop your information, on the website, how we can get in touch with you. Matter of fact, drop it in, but would you mind just letting us know where we can get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on Facebook or Instagram, and the handle is right there at Jen Money Coach, or you can just go to jenmoneycoach.com. Yeah.
All right.
Awesome. Jen, pleasure as always. And we will talk to you soon. And Eric, as usual, you heard it from our mouths, actually Jen's mouth, to your ears. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
And stay safe, America.
Thank you.